You're about to discover why some of the richest people on Earth are dumping their mansions, selling their tech stocks, quietly moving their money out of cities, and pouring billions into something your grandparents would recognize instantly: farmland. At first glance, it makes no sense. Why would the most futuristic, data-driven billionaires suddenly chase an asset that looks like it belongs in the 1800s? But once you see the hidden math behind this land grab, and the coming shock it signals for your food, your savings, and your future, you'll understand why this is happening now, and why it's accelerating faster than anyone expected. Because there is a moment coming, a collision of economics, climate shifts, and geopolitical tensions that could turn farmland from a boring, overlooked asset into the most powerful form of control on the planet. And later in this video, you'll see exactly what billionaires think is about to happen, and why they want to own the one thing humanity simply cannot live without. But first, let's rewind to the question nobody seems to ask. When did dirt become more valuable than skyscrapers? For most of modern history, farmland was considered stable but unexciting, something passed down through families rather than traded by hedge funds. Yet, in the last decade, the price of high-quality farmland has quietly beaten the stock market on a risk-adjusted basis. It never crashes as hard, it rarely loses value, and every year it produces something incredibly powerful: food people must buy no matter what. If you're a billionaire looking to protect your wealth from inflation, chaos, or political uncertainty, farmland is like a natural vault. It grows food, stores value, and if the world gets unpredictable, the land itself becomes a form of security. But the real story starts when these billionaires realize something darker. Demand for food is rising faster than our ability to produce it. But here's where it gets strange. Billionaires aren't just buying farmland as a passive investment. They're treating it like the new oil fields, strategic assets that can determine the fate of entire regions. They're targeting land with access to clean water, land near transportation networks, land with specific soil chemistry. They're paying prices that make farmers shake their heads, because the billionaires aren't calculating value the way farmers do. They're calculating leverage. Control the food supply, even a small percentage of it, and suddenly you control something governments themselves cannot ignore. And this is where your life enters the story, because the decisions these elites are making now will shape the prices you pay at the store, the stability of your communities, and maybe even the job markets that depend on agriculture. But here's what nobody tells you. This farmland rush didn't start with billionaires. It started with governments. After the 2008 financial crisis, major countries began quietly acquiring farmland outside their borders, places in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe, because they saw a threat no one talked about on the news. Global food supply chains were fragile. Too fragile. One drought, one political conflict, one regional shortage could cause ripple effects across the world. When governments started panic buying land, billionaires followed. And when billionaires began buying land, hedge funds rushed in too. Suddenly, farmland wasn't just land. It was a geopolitical chess piece. But the turning point came when climate models revealed something unsettling. Some regions of farmland are set to become dramatically more valuable as rainfall patterns shift. Others, meanwhile, are predicted to become nearly unfarmable. Billionaires saw these maps before the public did. They saw where water tables were dropping, which regions would become drought-resistant, which rivers were drying up, and which areas would be safe from extreme climate volatility. And so they began a silent migration, not toward cities, not toward tech hubs, but toward the places where food production will survive the next 30 years. What does that mean for you? It means the richest people on Earth believe that the future of power isn't in apps, or crypto, or skyscrapers. It's in soil. This is the dangerous part. Once billionaires realized farmland wasn't just an asset but a survival resource, the buying spree exploded. Some regions saw land prices double in under 5 years. In certain U.S. states, farmland prices hit records even during economic downturns. Regular farmers suddenly found themselves competing with people who had virtually unlimited money. And if you've ever wondered why younger generations can't afford to buy into farming anymore, this is one reason. They're being priced out by tech billionaires who don't want to farm. They want to own the land because they know what's coming. And every time a billionaire buys a parcel of land, That land is removed from the reach of families who have farmed for generations. But the story gets even more unsettling. These billionaires aren't just buying farmland, they're buying water rights. In some regions, the water beneath the land is far more valuable than the soil itself. Control water and you control agriculture. Control agriculture and you control food. Control food and you influence everything. This isn't some conspiracy theory. It's basic economics combined with basic survival. If water scarcity increases, the people holding those rights will possess one of the most powerful assets on the planet. And billionaires know this. They saw the warning signs years ago. Shrinking reservoirs, unpredictable rainfall, aquifers declining at alarming rates. They're not preparing for a theoretical future. They're preparing for the world we're already entering. But here's the part almost nobody understands. Farmland is one of the few assets that benefits from chaos. When inflation rises, food prices rise. When supply chains break, local food becomes more valuable. When currencies weaken, farmland remains real. And in a world filled with unpredictable shocks, pandemics, wars, energy shortages, owning the means of food production is like owning a lifeboat while everyone else is still arguing about whether the ship is sinking. That's why billionaires are selling tech stocks, real estate, even parts of their companies. They're converting everything into something the modern world can't replace. Fertile land. And yet, the biggest twist is still ahead. Because the farmland they're buying today isn't just for growing crops. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Farmland isn't just farmland anymore. It's becoming the foundation for an entirely new power structure. One built on food, data, and energy all intertwined. The billionaires buying land aren't planning to farm it like your grandparents did. They're preparing it for a future in which agriculture is merged with artificial intelligence, robotics, and renewable energy systems. In other words, the land they're buying is becoming a platform. A platform for vertical integration of control, food production, water management, data harvesting, and carbon capture. And once you understand this, the entire buying frenzy starts to make sense. Because in the emerging economy, whoever controls the inputs controls the outputs. If you own the land, you own the data generated on that land: soil sensors, crop health metrics, yield predictions. If you own the land, you own the carbon credits it produces. If you own the land, you own the renewable energy potential of that land: solar arrays, wind installations, geothermal taps. Suddenly, farmland isn't just a farm. It's a multi-layered asset producing food, data, energy, and carbon profits simultaneously. And data, as you already know, is the new oil. But what happens when data and literal food production collide? Billionaires believe that collision will reshape global wealth for decades. But here's what nobody tells you. When billionaires buy farmland, they aren't buying just square miles. They're buying future monopolies. Think about it. If you control vast agricultural regions, you don't just influence supply, you influence the technology companies need to operate in those regions. You influence food processing chains, distribution networks, shipping patterns, commodity prices. You influence which crops are grown and which aren't. You indirectly influence diet, pricing, and even health outcomes across entire populations. You become the invisible thumb on the scale. And if that sounds dramatic, remember this. Throughout history, societies have risen and fallen based on who controlled the land. But there's a modern twist that makes this moment even more alarming. Traditional farmers are aging out, and younger people aren't replacing them. The average age of farmers is rising, and many farms don't have heirs willing to take over. Billionaires see something in this demographic shift. An opening. A vacuum. A chance to quietly absorb farmland as families exit the industry. And because the process is so gradual, most people don't notice the takeover until it's already happened. What does that mean for you? It means the food system you rely on is slowly, quietly being transferred from millions of independent farmers to a handful of ultra-wealthy individuals and financial institutions. And then comes the environmental layer. Billionaires aren't buying just any farmland. They're targeting land that will thrive in the climate map of the future. Regions expected to get more rainfall, regions that stay cooler longer, regions with access to deep aquifers, regions protected from extreme heat waves. They're essentially future-proofing their assets against climate volatility. And whether you believe in the forecasts or not, the billionaires do. They're betting billions of dollars on them. But the hidden consequence is that the farmland they're buying today may become the only reliably fertile farmland tomorrow. And if that happens, those who own the land will have unmatched power, economic, political, and social. But here's the dangerous part. Global population is still growing. Food demand is still rising. Water scarcity is accelerating. Supply chains are under stress. And geopolitical tensions continue to choke agricultural exports from key regions. This means that even small disruptions can cause massive price spikes. And in that kind of world, farmland becomes not just valuable but essential. Think about the last time you saw grocery prices rise unexpectedly. Now imagine that happening on a global scale, driven by shortages, heat waves, or export bans. Billionaires are preparing for that world. The question is, are you? But to really understand why the ultra-rich are buying farmland, you need to understand one more layer, the financial engineering behind the scenes. Some billionaires are using farmland as a tax shield. When you own thousands of acres, you can depreciate equipment, write off improvements, reduce estate taxes, and access government subsidies. Farmland becomes a wealth preservation machine. It's one of the few assets that generates income while also shrinking your tax liability. And if you ever wondered why billionaires appear to pay less in taxes proportionally than everyday workers, farmland is part of the answer. It's a legal loophole disguised as cornfields and soybeans. But this is where things get unsettling. Because the billionaires aren't just collecting land, they're consolidating it. They're stitching together parcels to create megafarms that produce at a scale individual farmers cannot match. With automation, one billionaire-owned farm can produce the output of dozens of family farms. And once they scale up, they can undercut smaller farmers, forcing them to sell. This isn't competition. This is economic gravity pulling everything upward into fewer and fewer hands. And once farmland is concentrated at the top, the control that comes with it is almost impossible to reverse. But wait, there's another twist, one that ties everything together. Billionaires know that the next big commodity isn't gold, oil, or even data. It's stability. And farmland, especially water-rich farmland, is the ultimate stability asset. While stocks swing wildly and currencies weaken, land remains. While technological trends shift unpredictably, food demand persists. While cities become more expensive and volatile, rural land quietly generates increasing value. Farmland is the closest thing the modern world has to guaranteed relevance. And billionaires aren't investing in what's trending today, they're investing in what humanity will need forever. But here's the part that may shock you. Some billionaires aren't just preparing for financial volatility, they're preparing for civilizational volatility. They see farmland as a lifeline if systems fail. Food, water, energy, shelter, the essentials. The things modern society assumes will always be provided. The ultra-rich aren't betting on collapse, but they're preparing for the possibility that the global system hits turbulence large enough to make self-sustaining land the ultimate insurance policy. And their urgency in acquiring that land should make you wonder what they think is coming. But here's where it gets even more surreal. Billionaires aren't just buying farmland to respond to the future, they're buying it to engineer the future they want. Because once you own the land, you decide what gets planted, how it's grown, which technologies are used, and which companies get access to the food system. And this gives them influence far beyond the acres they purchase. They can shape supply, shape demand, shape infrastructure, shape policy. They can create bottlenecks where none existed, and opportunities where they alone hold the keys. Behind the scenes, farmland is becoming the private laboratory for the next food revolution. And the people in charge are not farmers. They're tech billionaires who think in decades, not harvest seasons. Take a moment to imagine this future. Artificial intelligence-driven tractors scanning soil in real time. Autonomous drones monitoring plant health. Vertical farms rising out of rural landscapes. Climate-resilient seeds engineered to grow in harsher conditions. Carbon capture crops designed to generate environmental credits. All of it owned, controlled, and patented by the same handful of ultra-wealthy individuals expanding their farmland empires. They're building the infrastructure of a hybrid world, half nature, half machine, where farms operate more like high-tech factories than fields. And the data produced by this system is worth billions. Because when you know exactly how crops perform under specific conditions, you can predict food scarcity, manipulate supply, and influence prices long before the public notices any change. But here's what nobody tells you. Billionaires aren't just building farms. They're building ecosystems. They're investing in fertilizer companies, seed technology, irrigation companies, satellite imaging startups, logistics platforms, grain storage facilities, and even shipping routes. They want the entire food pipeline end to end. Because the moment they control the chain, they control the margins. They control the bottlenecks. They control the leverage points governments depend on. And if you control the food system, even partially, you don't need political power, you already have something stronger. This is the turning point. Once farmland becomes linked to technology and financial engineering, it stops behaving like a simple commodity. It becomes a strategic asset capable of reshaping global markets. And in that environment, regular people don't stand a chance competing for land. Not when billionaires can pay above market prices, wait decades for returns, and still profit indirectly through data, energy, and tax credits. And while you're worrying about rising grocery bills, the ultra-rich are quietly positioning themselves to own the very ground that determines those prices. But here's the chilling part. As the farmland consolidation intensifies, something else is happening. Food independence is disappearing. Countries that once grew enough food to feed themselves now rely on imports. Small farmers who once fed entire regions are being replaced by monoculture megafarms optimized for global commodity markets. And when a system becomes that centralized, it becomes fragile. One disruption at the top can send shockwaves to millions of people. One drought in a billionaire-owned region. One supply chain bottleneck. One export ban. Suddenly the world feels the consequences. And the billionaires, knowing this, position themselves to profit no matter the outcome. But that's not even the darkest layer. Some billionaires aren't just buying farmland, they're buying influence over the future of food itself. They're funding research into lab-grown meat, genetically edited crops, synthetic proteins, and automated food manufacturing. They're placing bets on what humanity will eat in 10, 20, 30 years. And if those bets pay off, they will control not just the farms of the present, but the diets of the future. Imagine a world where the same people who own the farmland also own the factories that produce synthetic food and the patents that dictate how it's made. That's not a food system, that's a monopoly on survival. But here's what you need to ask yourself. Why now? Why are billionaires selling off mansions, yachts, commercial buildings, even shares in their own companies, just to buy farmland? What do they see that the average person doesn't? They see a world entering a period of transition, a shift driven by climate, economics, demographics, and political instability. They see growing populations colliding with shrinking farmland. They see water scarcity turning fertile regions into battlegrounds. They see supply chains strained by global conflict. They see inflation that can be weaponized. And most importantly, they see that in times of crisis, people don't care about tech innovation or digital luxury. They care about food, water, energy, the basics. Once you understand that, everything billionaires are doing begins to look less like a bizarre investment strategy, and more like early positioning for a world where essentials outrank everything else. And the more farmland they acquire now, the more influence they will hold when the balance shifts. If the world tightens, they win. If the world grows unstable, they win. If the world needs food more than ever, they win bigger than anyone. But here's the dangerous twist. This land rush isn't just about owning the future. It's about surviving it. Many billionaires are building private compounds on or near their farmland. Underground shelters, off-grid energy systems, private reservoirs, localized security. It's not paranoia, it's preparation. Because they know that if the global systems falter, the people who own productive land will be the ones who remain in control. And while most of society is still distracted by consumer technology, entertainment, and short-term political drama, The wealthiest individuals on Earth are quietly preparing for a long game, a game built on the oldest resource of all, the soil beneath our feet. But stay with this thought. What happens when farmland becomes so concentrated that access to food itself becomes a controlled, monetized, data-driven industry? What happens when the price of land rises so high that the next generation of farmers never arrives? What happens when the decisions about what gets grown are made not by people who live on the land, but by people who view it only through spreadsheets? But here's the most shocking part of all. Billionaire farmland ownership isn't just a trend. It's a countdown, a signal, a warning, because the ultra-rich don't move together unless they see something massive on the horizon. Something that threatens the value of traditional wealth and elevates the importance of real, physical resources. They're not buying farmland because they want to become farmers. They're buying it because they believe that controlling food, water, and land will matter more in the next era than controlling apps, media platforms, or even currencies. And the timing is not random. It aligns with a perfect storm of inflation pressure, supply chain fragility, environmental volatility, and political instability that could make the next decade the most turbulent one in modern history. But what scares them the most isn't a collapse. It's a transition. A slow, grinding reconfiguration of global power where digital wealth becomes fragile and physical assets become king. They see a world where money moves at the speed of light, but food still takes months to grow. A world where virtual assets can evaporate overnight, but land quietly compounds in value. A world where nations argue over ideology, while water tables silently shrink and crop yields fluctuate. They're watching the fundamentals, not the noise. And the fundamentals are pointing toward scarcity. And scarcity is where real power emerges. If food becomes more expensive to produce, those who own the land win. If water becomes more precious, those who hold the rights win. If supply chains break, local producers win. If energy costs spike, those who integrate renewables into their farmland win. It's a no-lose strategy, one that works in crisis and thrives in chaos. And this is the part that affects you directly. When billionaires position themselves to profit from scarcity, scarcity tends to follow. Not because they create it intentionally, but because their consolidation reshapes the market, pushing small farmers out, reducing diversity in the food supply, and increasing dependence on centralized systems. But here's the turning point. The farmland rush reveals a truth society rarely admits. Food security is wealth. Water security is wealth. Land security is wealth. Everything else, everything digital, everything symbolic, depends on these physical building blocks. Your job, your savings, your lifestyle, your stability. All of it depends on a global system that assumes the basics will always remain stable. Billionaires are signaling with their money that these basics might be the first things to crack. And yet, buried inside this story is a strange hope. Because farmland is one of the few assets that can regenerate itself. Can produce abundance year after year if cared for. Can heal damaged ecosystems. Can anchor communities. Can safeguard nations. The problem isn't that billionaires are buying farmland. The problem is what happens when too few people own too much of it. A resilient world depends on distributed resources, not concentrated dominance. But we are drifting toward the opposite. And unless more people understand what's happening, the future of food will be determined not by the hands that grow it, but by the portfolios that own it. So what does all of this mean for you? It means you are living through a shift in how power works. A shift from digital dominance to physical sovereignty. A shift from speculative wealth to essential wealth. A shift from owning things that entertain to owning things that sustain. And the billionaires who are selling luxury assets and scooping up farmland are betting that when the dust settles, the world will run on the same things it always has. Food, water, land, and energy. They're positioning themselves at the center of that reality. But here's the final twist. You still have agency. You still have awareness. And awareness is the starting point of leverage. You can understand how global food systems work. You can see where scarcity is forming. You can protect yourself from the consequences of consolidation. And you can make choices, financial, political, personal, that support a future where essential resources remain accessible to everyone, not just the people who could afford to buy thousands of acres before the rest of the world woke up. If this opened your eyes, then stay with us, because this story is only just beginning. The world is changing, and those who understand the shift will navigate it far more safely than those who don't. And if you want more deep, revealing stories like this, stories that expose the hidden forces shaping your future, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments what part of this farmland takeover shocked you the most. Your voice matters, and your curiosity matters even more. Now let's finish what we started. Let's put the pieces together and prepare for the world that's coming before it gets here.